Okay, I think we are ready to start. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon to our guests. Good afternoon to everyone watching us right now on the live stream on YouTube and on Facebook. And we are here. I mean, we had presentations in the early afternoon. We had a roundtable that just finished. And now we are going to have yet another roundtable. And this one, it's going to be a very interesting one. So first, let me just start by introducing myself. My name is Tomás Vieira Silva. I'm going to be the chair of this debate, this discussion, even though I don't really like to be called or to name myself the chair of the debate. I'll just be facilitating the conversation between our guests. And I shall start by introducing our guests of today. Christina Garrigos is a professor of American literature at the National University of Distance Education, Spain, and she has taught at many other different universities in Spain, such as the University Autonomous of Madrid, the University of León, and some universities in the United States, such as the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, the University of Mississippi, and the Texas A&M International. She holds a BA and a PhD in English from the University of Seville and a Master's in Comparative Literature from the University of North Carolina. She has been a visiting scholar at several universities across Europe and the United States. Also, she has been an active member of several associations. She has been on several editorial boards. She has been on editorial boards and a scientific advisor for several journals. And her main research interests are US contemporary literature, postmodernism, film, music, and gender. And she has been the author and an editor of many different books. And if you allow me, Christina, I'll have to point out one which seems to be very, very important for our conversation today, which is the book of interviews called God Save the Queen, Pioneras del Punk. Thank you so much for joining us. And we also have here Renata Frade. Renata Frade is a doctoral candidate in information and communication in digital platforms at the University of Aveiro and the University of Porto. She has been developing a thesis about Portuguese and Brazilian women in tech. She is a researcher, a consultant, and a teacher in transmedia, and also a lecturer, professor, and national and international content producer about female activism in technology. She has been a main speaker at Gartner, ThoughtWorks, Universidade Anhembi Urumbi, and others. She also studied new media at the Stanford Graduate School of Business. She is a voluntary member of a fantastic NGO that I actually knew before the debate, which is Girls in Tech Brazil. She has been a member there for 3 years, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
Yeah, and she is a voluntary mentor at another NGO called Mulheres no Comando. She is a frequent collaborator of Digital Talks website, and she studied storytelling and entrepreneurship at NADSCAD Entrepreneur Center in San Francisco, California. Lastly, she has been published in more than I think 11 books at least.
Yes.
I have to say that after reading your bios, I felt pretty intimidated. That's maybe why I prefer to say that I'm a facilitator and not the moderator. And now let me just start by telling our viewers how this will work out, how this panel will work out. So each of our guest speakers will go through their research, their main research that's relevant to our conversation today in more or less 5 minutes. And then we will start a discussion, a conversation with some already prepared questions, some questions that will come into my mind while I listen to their presentations. And at the end of this, you'll be able to send us questions on the YouTube chat that there is, I think, on my left, so on your right, and by comment on Facebook. I don't know, Christina, would you like to start?
Sure.
To start us off?
Okay. Thank you, Tomás, for the presentation.
Well, thank you for putting all this together. And I'd like to start, well, as you say, just opening a question. The question addresses the title of my presentation and of this conference. So I'd like to start with a what if question, right? Now, my question would be, what if the punk movement had been exclusively masculine as it had been traditionally perceived? So I think that in order to answer that question, the first thing that we have to do is to determine what we understand by punk. And in general, I think that when we use the word punk, we are thinking of a very specific scene in London, New York, Los Angeles, Berlin, that was very active for a few years, especially in the mid 70s, early 80s, and that it was extremely influential in what came afterwards. In the art world, music, cinema, literature, but also in social models and politics. So that we can see that the idea of punk extends beyond a time-space frame. So what I understand by punk is an attitude, a way of understanding society and art. So a way of living, right? So at the beginning, researchers such as Lucy O'Brien or Helen Reddington, Paula Guerra from the University of Porto, Vivian Goldman, or even myself, if I may, we have shown that there were women involved in development of this movement. So even though they may not have been very visible until recently for the general audience, the people who were there, they knew that there were women in this scene and that they participated very actively. So going back to the question, what if the punk movement had been exclusively masculine? So my answer would be that the world, as we know it today, would be completely different. So let me present you with three ideas. Now, the first one would be punk was or is a cultural revolution. And an important part of this revolution was the participation of women. The second idea is that punk was inclusive. And as opposed to other musical or artistic movements, gender and ethnic differences were not that important in the punk scene, in the early punk scene, at least. And three, punk was a form of empowerment for women, okay? So if women had not been part of that scene, punk would have been something completely different. It would not be the multifaceted style that we have today. It would be more male-oriented, probably more hardcore, and definitely it would not have been inclusive. Hence, it would not have been a cultural revolution, and in other words, punk would not exist. So in my opinion, erasing women such as Patti Smith, Kathy Acker, Polystyrene, the Slits, the Raincoats, and many others from history would have meant that punk would not have had the transcendence it has today, and it would be something completely different. And I would like to cite, I mean, you have mentioned the book of interviews that I co-edited with Paula Guerra and Nuria Triana, God Save the Queens, Pioneras del Punk. And in that book, I mean, we had the interviews with women who were pioneers in the early punk scene, such as Alice Bag, Palmolive, you have Ondina Pires, Ana da Silva, Begoña Astigarraga from Spain, Teresa Rodriguez, right? And I'd like to quote Alice Bag, who is such an important person for the punk scene in Los Angeles and in the United States in general. And she defined what for her was punk. She said, "Punk is rebellion. It's the part of me that claims ownership of my life and feels empowered to shape my future. I identify as a woman and as a feminist because I believe in equality. Punk has the power both to destroy and to create. So being a Chicana punk means I use my creativity to destroy the white patriarchal system and create something more inclusive. So I think that Alice Back believes that the early scene punk women were not, she says, demure or soft-spoken as society had trained them to be. They did not feel that they had to be led by a man. Punk allow women to be complete human beings, she says, and to celebrate their own creativity and or sexual urges. So in general, I think that punk allow women to express themselves freely through music, art, or even fashion, through the use, of leather jackets, ripped jeans, exploring their sexuality in different ways. You have more androgynous and androgynous sense, such as Patti Smith. I have her behind me, as you can see, or polystyrene, for instance, or in a more feminine, sexualized way. So different ways of exploring, your creativity. And one question that I would ask, and this relates to Patti Smith, is what would have happened? What if Patti Smith had not existed, right? Well, I think that if Patti Smith had not existed and she had recorded horses, for instance, the music of many artists today would be very different. She inspired, influenced, and empowered a whole generation of female singers, but also of male singers. For instance, again, going back to Alice Bag, she tells, I mean, she remembers that she wants to see Patti Smith at the Roxy Theater in 1976. And she says that Patti Smith changed the way that she thought about female performers. She said that up to that point, the female performers she had seen were very manicured, that they were pretty pleasing package for the music. And Patty was raw energy, intellect, animal sexuality. She lacked this safe, glossy exterior, and she said, Alice Bach says that her rough edges could cut you. She was mesmerizing and sensual, and her intellect owned the stage. So I think that Patty really was a revolution for many women. And also nowadays, I mean, with the publication of her memoirs, she has opened the way for many other women who are telling their stories. So in my opinion, if Alice Bag and others like Exen Cervenka, Teresa Covarrubias, the Go-Go's had not participated in the punk movement on the West Coast in the late 70s, early 80s, the Riot Girls, for instance, they would not have existed. There would be no bands such as Bikini Kill or Slater Kinney or others who shaped many of the bands that came afterwards all over the world. And they were not only relevant for their music, they empower a whole generation of women to go to the front, not only literally in the concerts, in the gigs, but also metaphorically in life through their manifestos, fanzines, etc. So even if the punk pioneers did not have a sense of themselves as feminists, even if they did not define themselves as feminists, then looking in retrospective, I think that it is clear that what they did, their belief that women and men have the same rights, opened the way for future forms of feminism. So if the pioneers had not existed, neither the Pussy Riot performance at the Cathedral of Moscow would have taken place, nor the song Un Violador en Tu Camino by the Chilean group Las Tesis, which has become a global phenomenon, empowering women all over the world, would exist. So I think that the vindication of women's rights in the world would not be as powerful as it is using music and performance as social and political tools. So in my opinion, I think that the example from the punk pioneers and all the women who followed and men imply that the music and art can be used to fight for empowerment and to question gender roles and social inequalities. So the art and activists would not have existed without the pioneers, but in turn, what they are doing with their performances now and their attitude, challenging stereotypes, is contributing to make braver people and a more equal society. So there is a continuation, and I think that all these women, they still want to women to be free from violence, from fear, to express themselves. And this is something that they learn or that comes from the punk pioneers. So, in other words, going back to the question, if there had been no women in punk, I think that the world, as we know it today, would be very different, and it would be probably a worse place for women. So, this is my idea.
Thank you so much. We'll go back to your idea because you raise very, very interesting and important points. And I have to say that we'll go back to Patti Smith because, I mean, I love Patti Smith and I had to choose a quote of her. Renata, would you mind telling us a little bit about your research?
Yes, I would like to thank Ana Silveira for inviting me to this challenge, and also you for being so supportive with me and Christina. Well, women were pioneers in programming from the 19th to the 20th century, coding and training people to use ENIAC, which was fundamental computer for the victory of the Allies in the World War II, and also responsible for the creation of ARPANET, a project that gave rise to the web, for instance. I would like to propose an alternatives history where female IT communities could determine equal pay and professional opportunities in one of the greatest areas of patriarchy, if they had not been emptied socially, politically, historically, and economically in the 80s. So to answer, why did women stop being protagonists in technology? I need to address some important moments in history related to women in technology. When we try to conceptualize what women in technology is fundamental to contextualize what is to be a woman in tech in each, what is to be a woman in each historical period. Female mental labor was the original information technology, and women elevated the rudimentary operation of computing machines into an art called programming. Historically, technology was conceived and consumed by men. The democratization of the internet and the emergence of networked society from the end of the 20th century onwards provoked an unprecedented technological and communicational revolution. Socialist Manuel Castos highlighted historical facts linked to gender issues that profoundly marked the evolution of feminism, the presence of women in universities and the labor market, in addition to the close relationship established with digital platforms and information technologies. According to the researcher, women's struggles have always been present in all stages of the human experience, with emphasis on the suffrage movement in the USA. However, in the last 25 years of the 20th century, there was a global intensification of the feminist cause against oppression, the search of greater social and professional representation, reflected in the private sphere in different degrees of intensity in Western and Eastern countries. Coming back in history, Ada Lovelace, a daughter of the poet Lord Byron, in the 19th century, she invented an algorithm for Bernoulli's analytical number calculating machine. The algorithm is considered the first specifically adapted for implementation on a computer, She is considered the first programmer in the world. As a young mathematician in Victorian England, she met Charles Babbage, the inventor who was trying to create an analytical engine. The engine was a steampunk precursor to the modern computer. Though designed to be made of metal gears, it could execute loops and store data in memory. More even than Babbage, Lovelace grasped the enormous potential of computers. She understood that because they could modify their own instructions and memory, they could be far more than rote calculators. To prove it, Lovelace wrote what is often regarded as the first computer program in history. Feminist causes that emerged after the Industrial Revolution were especially linked to social causes such as civil labor and voting rights until the middle of the 20th century. World War II was a war of technology. The relationships between government, private industry, and academia forged to gain a national edge of the Axis gave us the military-industrial complex and bankrolls a generation of technological innovators in the process. It's unlikely computing would have developed as a field or an industry as quickly as it did without the complex calculations demanded by the war machine. The war made risks worth taking and accelerated everything. It also let women into the process. Men may have dropped bombs, but it was women who told them where to do it. Women were some of the first ever coders in the 50s, and they comprised some of the first towering figures, such as Grace Hopper. When the age of truly electronic computers began in the 1940s, women were again at the center of action. Men certainly were central to this machine age, but at this point, they felt all the rugged glory and heroism lay in making the hardware. The first programmable digital computer in the US, the ENIAC, I want to describe it, it's very complex. Women had long been involved in the cut work of doing calculations. In the years leading up to the ENIAC, many companies used huge electronic tabulating machines they bought from companies like IBM. Women frequently worked as the punch card operators for these machines. They would punch holes in punch cards that represented, for example, how many hours an employee worked, then feed them into the tabulating machine and to add them up. Coding had quickly become a rare white-collar professional field in which women could thrive. For ambitious women in the 60s, the traditional elite professional field surgery, law, mechanical engineering accepted almost no women. Programming was an outlier. The proportion of female coders was fully 1 in 4, a stunningly high figure given the period. The options for women with math degrees were limited, teaching high school math or doing rote calculations at insurance firms, for example. So women back then would basically go, well, if I don't do programming, what else will I do? The next wave of coders were the hackers of the 60s and early 70s. They regarded themselves as renegades, the ones who wrested computing away from restrictive institutions. Much of that culture was born at MIT, where the artificial intelligence lab acquired some of the early real-time machines. MIT hackers regarded themselves as liberating programming from its mundane history of mere bean counting and scientific problem solving. Coding itself, they felt, was playful artistic art. They were establishing a hacker ethic. They were also the first generation that began to push women out of the field. The core scene of hackers in the MIT lab were exclusively men with no interest in dealing with anyone except those like themselves. They saw themselves as a priestly class devoted to their craft above all else. Hacking had replaced sex in their lives. With male hackers sleeping in the lab at night, the environment trended toward that of Naugaidoom. The tinkering culture of the hackers too could collide with what MIT's computer scientists who were trying to use the machines to get important research work done. One of the latter was Margaret Hamilton, a young MIT coder who would later become a famous programmer engineering mission critical NASA systems, helping to land Apollo mission safely on the moon. I'm sorry, just a minute, please.
No worries, no worries.
I'm sorry.
Don't worry.
Well, can I continue? Because
please.
I will answer why did women stop being protagonists in technology, some factors. A reference work on technological feminism, Jane Abbott, reinforces the last 4 decades, gender and technology have been shaped and modified. According to her, engaged as technical specialists since the beginning of digital computing, women are inventing careers and professional identities at the same time as the field itself took shape. Their stories illustrate power. By the 80s, women as historical actors were widely neglected in the history of science and technology, and one of the main projects of academic feminism was to restore women's contributions. 1975 was designated International Women Year for the United Nations. The objectives established for our first event were to define a society in which women could fully participate in economic, social, and political aspects of their countries. To mark the International Women Year, a conference was held in Mexico where a World Action Plan was assigned to implement 2 objectives of the International Women Year, proposed as a central question during the 80s, the Women Decade according to UN. In 1985, the closing conference of Women Decade was in Nairobi, and this conference demanded 2 specific tasks: to review the progress achieved in the obstacles encountered during the decade and to adopt a coherent set of prospective strategies for the advancement of women at the year 2000. Various feminists and feminist non-governmental organizations participated in the event. That decade was marked by the consumerist expansion of capitalism. Acquiring some expensive services, such as technological ones, guarantees the consumer status in a way that they will relate and be professionally gratified. Publicity expanded immensely during the decade. I'm sorry, I was reading the chat. The decade and has been extensively explored by large technology companies such as Apple and Microsoft, and reinforces another stereotype: acquisition of personal computers as professional rise and virality attribution. Technologies have a masculine image because they incorporate symbols, metaphors, and values that have masculine connotations. As a science, the language itself gives technology and masculinity. And personal computers were a notion that teenagers navigated, played video games, and women were a part of all this consumption until the beginning of the release of web in the transition of the 20th century to 21st. I will not say much because I have said too much.
Thank you so much, Renata. No, it was you covered quite a lot as well in these remarks, and I think if you don't mind, I'll just ask you a very brief question. From all this evolution in time of all the repression of women in tech until the days, the women in tech nowadays. What would you say that are the main characteristics of women in tech? I mean, this is at risk of asking for a generalization, obviously, but what would you say are the main characteristics?
It's very hard because, as I said, when we try to conceptualize women in tech, we need to think about women in each decade, in the last decade. So it's not apart from historical and social movements, for instance.
Okay.
What I can say, it's the communities, the women in tech communities can express some women in tech characteristics. So I can explain that if you want.
Yeah, just briefly, just very briefly, the main points that kind of contribute to characterization.
In the last 10 years, women in tech intended to fight for more rights and demands equal payment, equal professional conditions, and they have some common purposes. For instance, the maker culture formation, the do-it-yourself culture. It's something like self-improvement, empowerment, educational. So to teach girls how to program, entrepreneurship. So it's related to network promotion, creating business, and in political and social, in order to provide a collective articulation and to consolidate labor inclusion laws, for instance.
Okay. I think I can see here, I mean, one word that stuck to me was the word of self-empowerment. And with this, I mean, I have to go to this quote of Patti Smith that says, to me, punk rock is the freedom to create, the freedom to be successful, the freedom to not be successful, the freedom to be who you are. It's freedom. Christina, with this notion of self-empowerment and this notion of, or this Patti Smith idea of freedom, what do you think that what do you think that punk freedom is in terms, if we look at the idea of self-empowerment, for example?
Well, I think thank you for bringing Patti Smith. I mean, I think this. I love this quotation, and I think that it says a lot about what punk is and what punk is for women, and the role of women in punk. I mean, this idea of self-empowerment. This is why punk was so important for them, for women in general, because it since the punk attitude is to be angry or to be to protest against the system that you think that is not fair, right? So I think that women who had to fight against the patriarchal system, right, they found in this freedom, you know, where you can basically be whoever you want to be, and you don't have to fit in these standards. I mean, like what society expects from you, you know, following the stereotypes of what a woman has to be, so of what an artist has to be. So I think that in that way, punk provides the freedom, you know, to create, to be whoever you want to be. So it's what she says. So.
Yeah, it's quite an interesting, quite an interesting statement of Patty, and thank you so much for your explanation. And just going back to Renata's research, we saw that women had quite a significant impact in the evolution of technology way back in the day, and then they were discouraged. The patriarchy kind of pushed them away, right? Uh, do you think that the, the the work that's still being done by tech feminists that are that kind of came back to the game and that are making sure that their voices are heard, do you think, Renata, that this is kind of a punk attitude in tech?
Yes. Totally. Totally. For some women in tech, because it's very difficult to generalize.
Yeah.
For instance, my research is trying to figure out who are women, Brazilian and Portuguese women in tech. They are very different. I can't generalize, but for those who are fighting for political and social justice, I think they are really they really have a punk attitude. I think when I try to propose an alternative history for this theme here in this debate, I try to think about what could make things different. What could determine, for example, equal pay and professional opportunities for women in tech? And I think that that there were some feminist communiques in the 80s. They were social, political, and economical groups and associations. They were strong. I was surprised when I realized that, when I discovered that. And that was the time when women started also discovering the value of empowerment and how to work together in order to achieve personal and collective female objectives. And I think that they had a punk attitude. They were really strong. It was the time when women were leaving home again to build a professional career, developing new personal relations and skills. And those communities were safe places to help them improve education, to prevent, for instance, domestic violence, discover sexuality aspects. But it was vanished and only came back with with um, intensification in the last 10 years.
Okay.
After the web release.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I can see, because I mean, when I think about tech, and I'm sure I'm not the only one, but the thing is that I'm I'm very interested in punk and I'm very interested in tech, but I have to say that I'm more familiar with music than with technology. I mean, I have to say that, for example, I only actually understood what TikTok is a couple of weeks ago. So I'm very bad at technology. But it seems to me that if someone asked me about tech, I would only kind of think about, obviously these are not Portuguese or Brazilian names, but we can draw from these specific situations. But when I think about tech, I tend to think about, I don't know, maybe Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, Mark Zuckerberg. And I don't know why, but surely there are women in very key positions that had quite an impact in technology, but we just don't seem to hear about them, do we?
Yes, they were vanished from history due to patriarchy. There are many important women in tech all over the world, but mostly in United States and United Kingdom. So it was something that the patriarchy did it in purpose. I can mention, for instance, Hedy Lamarr. She was a Hollywood actress, pioneered the field of wireless communication. She developed a secret communication system to help the Allies fight the Nazis. Gracie Hopper was the third person to program Harvard Mark I, that a machine that was used in the World War II, for instance. There are many important women. Elizabeth Feinler, she was one of the women in charge of the ARPANET project, which was a system developed to establish a net that was similar to the web. So it was a project that is the beginning of the internet. So there are many women who were vanished from history.
That's the right word. It seems like they are vanished, right? It seems like they were deleted from history completely.
Yes,
Uh,
yes.
and that's, I mean, that's the, I would say, kind of the opposite of the case in punk, right, Christina? Because, for example, like you said in your presentation, if there wasn't Patti Smith, many men-led and women-led bands would not exist. I mean, I have to say that one of my favorite songs of Bruce Springsteen, it's not his song, it's Patti Smith's song. And I have to say that punk music, like you said, it's kind of it's kind of a reaction, right? Kind of a non-conformity to the status quo. Do you think that do you think that equality, generally speaking, equality of genders requires, because we saw that it seems to be required in punk, it seems to require in tech, but do you think that equality in general requires a punk attitude, not by only women, but by society in general?
Well, it seems that, unfortunately, I don't know, but it seems that you have to be angry, at least unapologetically asking for something, apparently, so that you get it. I don't know, like apparently asking for things nicely, or just pretending that that things are equal, like equal pay and so on. It doesn't seem to work. Because I mean, like when punk started, I mean, like they used to say that they were sort of tired of like the hippie attitude of the peace and love movement. I mean, Palmolive, she said that she thought that this kindness wasn't getting many things done, like you had to be angry asking for things so that they would listen to you. So unfortunately, I say, it seems that you have to get that protest in a kind of an open way, to get things done. And this is why, I mean, like at the beginning I was saying about all these movements, and especially related to feminism nowadays, that where you see very young women all over the world, especially in countries where there are like gender inequalities, and they are using music and performance and art to protest in an angry way, to to make very explicit that they are not happy with the system, because they think that it's unfair for many women, so I don't know. I mean, like as Patty said, I mean, like it's good that you have to be like angry, that you can be yourself and so on. But sometimes it seems that you don't have to be asking for forgiveness all the time.
Yeah,
You have to.
exactly. No, it seems like let me just make a brief comment to our viewers, that feel free to ask on Facebook or on the YouTube chat any question, or if you just want to make a comment about the discussion or about any particular issue. We are more than happy. I think that there is a comment that Emily Rossetti would like to make. Feel free to intervene if you want, Emily.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
I'll try to start video. Let's see. Okay, my hair doesn't look very good, but anyways. Listening to the talks, well, I don't study feminism, but I do study technology, especially internet. And these days I was writing about the imaginary of internet and all the stories and the narratives that are behind the history of internet. And it's funny because, well, not funny, actually, it's very sad that many authors, they say that, when you talk about the internet, the history itself of internet, it's always men. They're only men in the history of internet. But also, they also say that some characters of the history, they are actually they are erased from history. And then I was researching videos from the 60s that talk about technology and how technology will be amazing in the future and houses with many computers and stuff. There's one video, it's a commercial video from not Philips, it's Philco, from Philco, and they show the house of the future. It's actually called 1999, the house of the future. And then it shows a family in which the woman, she can go shopping online. And it's 60s. Internet was not there yet, but she goes shopping online. She used to teach, but now she can do pottery at home because she now has more time. But her husband works, and after she goes shopping, he gets the bill on his computer so he can pay for the bills. Then there's another video from the 90s. They talk about internet and how internet is amazing. Then there's this little boy who says, "Oh, now that I know internet, I'd rather be online than do anything else." Then his mom says, "Yes, his grades are even better." And then she looks at the girl and she says, "And Dasha's too." And then she talks about the boy and her husband. And all the time, it's always about men. It's always about men. Like, I'm not even talking about the history itself. As Renata said, many women are in the history of technology. Also, there were women in the history of the web. But even outside the web and technology and computers, they were not for women. Women could go shopping and prepare lunch. She could prepare lunch with her computer. But her husband, no, he would work out and work and go and play with his friends, and his son would play chess. The daughter, yes, she's there too, you know. Then just to make like this connection with what Christina has said, this was the 60s, and then another video from the 90s, but I have videos from all decades, and it's always like that. Then in the 70s, you have this punk movement, and then you have all the hippies also, they were there, and it was all about freedom, and it seems that women could have had a chance there, right? Because these movements, especially as Christina said, in the punk movement, women, they were strong, and they were they had not only a voice, they had like a main place, like a place of importance. But thing is, punk, that's just like, those punk movements, like even in the States, I remember I lived in the States for a while, and I remember people saying like, "Oh, you punk." Like, punk is a bad name. Punk is something it's a bad name, like, you anarchist, like, you're all about like no rules, and no, that's bad. And you see, the punk movement dies with the discourse of freedom as well. So it seems that I don't think only for women, but it seems that every time women have a chance, then there's another discourse that comes and kills the discourse of chances for minorities, like they killed women in tech, like they killed punk where women were strong. So all these movements, they're like, no, this is just like a bad name for someone. And well, that's it. It was just like a comment because it came to my mind all the discourse of like, now women, yeah, they're just there. They can use a computer sometimes. Oh, that's it.
Thank you so much, Emily. Thank you so much. It was a very pertinent comment for both areas that we are actually discussing here. I mean, I'm going to go to Christina and ask her about this idea of there is a discourse that, in this case, in punk, that also had happened in tech before, that kind of kills women chances, that kind of kills that chance to rise up. Do you think that's the case in punk? Because I mean, to be fair, in punk music, we also see some type nowadays, some type of more of a focus on male or men-dominated punk bands.
Oh yes, yes. Well, yes. Well, I want to thank Emily Rossetti for her comment because I think it was very interesting, and I agree. Of course, I mean, like when I said that punk was inclusive, I was referring especially to the beginning of punk, because everybody I have spoken with, I mean, like they say, well, at the beginning it was like men and women were together. I mean, like it was the same scene. There were no distinctions. But later on, there was a part of punk that developed into a very hardcore, macho-oriented philosophy, if you want. So there is this part of punk, definitely, very political too, in a way, and very misogynist. So what I wanted to make clear is that women were there from the very beginning, and punk, I think it's very multifaceted. I mean, like there are very different types of punk. Like when women are there, they all say that that it's like this attitude, you know, of inclusiveness and fighting for your rights, fighting for defending your empowerment, defending yourself, right? But it's true, and I agree that there are, like in music, for instance, there are bands in LA. I mean, like and well, everywhere, I guess, very macho, misogynistic bands. So yeah, there is that too.
It seems like that, yeah, while in punk in the early days, women were, it was kind of more inclusive, right? What was the opposite? That it kind of went from being inclusive to being quite closed, or to start to being sort of closed, doesn't it? Even though, I mean, we can think about Pussy Riot. Pussy Riot created a diplomatic, an international movement, didn't they?
I think that the what happened is like, as I said, like the early punk scene, I mean, like in the late 70s, early 80s, was very inclusive. Then I think that it's sort of like these women left their traces, you know, on other movements that developed all around the world, you know, like as I said, I mean, like Riot Girls, and then lately like Pussy Riot, and like so many movements and so many bands and so many artists all around the world. So I think that there has been in the last decade, I would say, a revival of punk values. You know, I don't know if it's because of this situation, political situation, this sense of apocalypse in the world, this no future thing that we have now with, unfortunately, the pandemics and everything going on, you know. But the young people, I mean, like they seem to be having to take this punk attitude again, you know. So it's like going back to the beginning. That's the feeling I have, you know.
Yeah.
Some people, of course, I mean, like
Yeah.
everywhere, you know, I know everybody. I mean, like I don't like this generalization. I mean, it's not like suddenly the whole world is going punk, but there are. And
Exactly. Thank you so much. I mean, I'm just looking at the time, and we have a couple of minutes. I just wanted to say that it seems like Renata and Christina both agree that we need a punk attitude if we want to achieve something in general. But if you are striving to fulfill the fifth UN development goal, it seems like we have to bring some punk into technology, some punk into society in general, and that's a message that I will personally keep. Thank you so much for.
Can I say something just
Yeah,
really
of course.
just to bring back Patty again? You know, she says that people have the power. You know,
Exactly.
and there are so many things right now. You know, like with the climate change. You know, and everything going on that maybe a little punk in here wouldn't hurt. So thank you so much.
I would like just one comment
please,
related to Emily's. I think besides any kind of discourse, feminist discourse, for instance, I think that women in tech are developing their own digital and tech literacies, besides discourses, but languages.
So it seems like women had to go at it alone because men wouldn't let them do it.
Yes.
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 Yeah, that's speaking as a man, I'm very, very sad that is the case. And I know that I'm just a white man from Europe, but you know, it's very, I don't really understand how people, men or women, but especially men, can be opposed to equality, because all in all, it's equality, isn't it? So again, we've reached the time. I want to thank you so much for being here. I want to thank you so much for all your presentations and your comments and your contributions to our fantastic panel. Renata, muito obrigado. Cristina, muchas gracias. It was a pleasure. I just want to finish off with last year. I finished off with a quote, and this year I'm not going to finish off with a quote because I already quoted Patty earlier. I just wanted to say something that's quite a strong message, and that is, please, everyone who's watching us, wear a mask. Thank you so much, and hopefully we'll see each other in person in Casa Comum. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you so much to Ana Silveira Moura and to Invicta Imaginaria for inviting us, and to Casa Comum for organizing this event. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good evening.
Bye.
Thank you.